images. And I didn't know what to not show, so some things will be very quick. But if you want to stop me, if you see something in particular, because fortunately I was able to acquire beautiful images that haven't been seen in any books thanks to Richard Gibbs and his collection. And so, wonderful. Okay, we're ready. This is very good. I've had to present lectures with my laptop showing it to people. So, and I don't recommend doing that. Hi.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Martha. This is the first time I'm introducing someone, but I'm very happy to do so. Fran usually does that, but it's my honor and privilege to welcome Frank. He's a local historian. He resides in Essex Fells, and today he will present to you Essex Fells history and architecture. So please welcome him. I'm sure you'll have a lot to share with you. So please enjoy and come again.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. I'm very I'm delighted that so many people, support local history. And I wanted to thank the Caldwell Public Library for all they do to allow us to make our presentations. The Essex Fells History Committee, Ron and Sharon Ellis, who have basically preserved all of the most important documents that Essex Fells has, and they're in a perfect archival form that are locked away. We're very fortunate that they've collected this. Bonnie Babson and Jean Eastman for the work that they did with the Garden Club to make a survey of the historic properties in Essex Fells. Richard Gibbs and his amazing collection. I like to tell Richard that I think he's the Essex Fells historian, and he's certainly the Essex Fells archive and historic library. The Essex Fells History Committee, and I'm the chair of that. The Essex Fells Garden Club, historian Beverly Crafazzi, who basically is the font of so much information in genealogy, and the Caldwell HPC, and I'm a member of that as well. So let's get going. Okay. Let's see. Well, I just wanted to say, Essex Fells is characterized by its tall growth trees, its dogwoods, its brooks, and its rolling hills. And the term fells literally means short hills. So it's like we do have a short hills town that's quite similar. Perhaps in the planning, they were thinking of that. But the reason why we have short hills in this area is because we are a glacial dump of sand and rock. When the glacier came down the Passaic River, that's how it formed. We were on the edge of the glacier, so it sort of dragged all of its material and left us with one of the most beautiful suburban communities in the United States. And when the infrastructure of the town was designed, this is something that it's not really known too well, is that the planner of Essex Fells, Bosdick, worked with Frederick Law Olmsted. They did several projects together. We have a park, the Grover Cleveland Park, that is designed by the Olmsted firm. And it's really the nature, it's the beautiful nature of Essex Fells that was the impetus of the design, and it's architecture. We have this beautiful painting by Hassler that shows Bailey's Pond. That's the pond in Grover Cleveland Park, and that's White Bridge before it was replaced with the new modern bridge. And I want you to see these paintings, as I said before. Look at each one, and you may see something that you recognize of our own environment. You know, you see this every day. This is what basically our area looked like before the developments. But I always say that Essex Fells was already a masterpiece before the artists arrived, and the visionary planners and architects in the mid-1800s. So these are just some, I mean, this is what my brook looks like on my property. And the sunset in the west, that part of West Caldwell that's Horton Road, looks like that. These are just all very familiar. So I don't want to spend too much time on ancient history, but it's important that, you know, let's say the developmental history goes back to 1609, you know, before there were communities of Lenape, who were basically driven out. And so our history begins in 1609 when Henry Hudson arrives in the Delaware River and then the Hudson River. So the Dutch colonists begin to populate the area. There is New Amsterdam, and you see that, and Raritan, and Horst. Now Horst was Horst Neck, N-E-K. It's a Dutch word. Its nickname, I mean, that's Horst Neck. That's where, you know, the Caldwells in our area developed from, and the nickname was given Horst Neck. But it comes from Horst Neck. So this is all information about the original sort of settlers. In 1702, they purchased 14,000 acres of the Horseneck tract from the Lenape Native Americans for goods equal to $325. But there was dispute with the British government. They were saying, you know, all right, you know, you have deeds and you bought this property, but it's not yours. You have to buy it from us. Because Lord Berkeley and Lord Carteret were selling off land in New Jersey. They were selling off the land grants to proprietors. And I mean, I find it just amazing what our history is really like and how much has been swept under the carpet, but they were allowing, they wanted people from the South, or they wanted people that wanted to do big plantations in New Jersey. So they gave 60 acres of free land for every slave that was brought into New Jersey. And that it was intentionally to set up a slave, you know, free labor economy. And they resisted. It was the last state to abolish slavery. So here you see again Horseneck. So the settlements in the 1700s were sort of proprietors with interest in the wood, in the lumber, and many of them were squatters and didn't have deeds to their property, and others had deeds, but they were not considered valid by the British. And they set up logging camps. And basically a style was born from this called Carpenter Gothic, because there was so much wood that there was a new architecture style sort of created by Alexander Jackson Davis, the architect, the father of American Gothic architecture, who is actually a Crane relative and from Bloomfield. He's buried at the Bloomfield Cemetery. He did the New York Stock Exchange. He designed Welland Park. And he sort of did a pattern book that you'll see at the end to sort of convince people to come out to New Jersey. His partner in this was Alexander Jackson Downing. They were related to President Jackson and met at the White House. And Downing had a monopoly on the ferry boat service on the Hudson River. So he wanted people to move to New Jersey. So they did the first pattern books about how to manage a garden. And, you know, they did the first house and garden back in 1850. So, you know, in the next generation of the original people that, you know, settled in the area, they gradually began to build substantial houses, and they were considered, you know, the houses began to be considered for their aesthetics and their comfort. So that's basically the beginning of, you know, the development of the American house as we know it today, the suburban house. So this is the Crane House in West Caldwell. I'm sure you pass it all the time. Is it Clinton Road?
It's on Clinton, but it's painted, it looks black.
Yeah, it looks like it's all black. And that was one of the first houses of the founders. The Crane family came to Newark with Robert Treat in 1693. This is a terrible photograph because it's very important to understand. This is the house on the corner of Roseland Avenue and Forest. And basically, in Essex Fells, this was General William Gould's property, and it's from 1740. I consider it the first house in Essex Fells. There might have been other, but it was a very big property. And the 1,000-acre property was purchased in 1891 by the developers of Essex Fells, and that was John Fell, who was the financier of the New York Suburban Land Company that developed Essex Fells. And there was Drexel. Drexel was doing planned communities in Philadelphia. So Drexel's daughter was married to Mr. Fell. So a lot of things that people don't know is that Drexel's business partner was J.P. Morgan. I'm going to show you this house in Caldwell. A lot of people don't realize that. Leavitt was the gentleman who lived in this house, and he worked for the suburban, you know, the New York Suburban Land Company to sell the houses, to market them, and he lived in General Gould's house. And then the 5 original houses were designed by W.D. Price, and all the landscaping of Essex Fells and the roads was designed by Mr. Bostick. I can never pronounce the name, I apologize. But you have to imagine what America was like when you were arriving from Britain or from Europe. It was totally different. The landscape is completely different. It's all of these deciduous trees, very tall trees, very dense. The landscape is, you know, because it was never really developed, was very rough and wild. And this sparked the imagination of a lot of artists and movements, like the Swedenborg movement, who believed that art and nature are linked because they're both divine. And the whole Hudson River Valley School was part of that because their paintings sort of have this quality that you didn't see in European paintings, and it's sort of like this mystical vision that gives you an emotion you can relate to, like, oh, you know, the sun is coming up or the sun is going down, and how you feel about that and your life, and you relate it to things. So that's like different. It was an American thing. So a lot of artists settled around here, especially in Montclair, where George Inness settled. And George Inness is considered the father of American landscape painting. He settled in Montclair, and it was America's first great visionary, Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park, who went wild over the Hudson River Valley School idea of painting, of capturing the raw American landscape. You know, these were just not composed as pretty easel paintings that you would sell in an emporium on Fifth Avenue, New York City. These had a lot of meaning and a lot of philosophy behind that. That's a beautiful painting, I think. And sort of, to me, one of the most emblematic of, would you like us to turn the lights out? Can you see? Should we try?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, because I have a feeling that it's hard to see the image.
Oh,
Oh, good. Okay. Great. So, I mean, these remind me of the school of Posillipo from Naples. They were doing sort of the same thing. They were doing views of the city and the beauty. But what's very interesting to understand is that Olmsted, when he was asked to design Central Park was supposed to be on the East River. He said, no, I believe it should be in the middle. He said every city should have a park in the middle. And the park should be just this plot of land that totally preserves what the original landscape of the city looked like. So his idea basically was to take a Hudson River Valley School sort of image of the raw American landscape, almost like a big painting of the Hudson River Valley School, and placing it in the middle of the city that was going to develop around it. And he said that someday every city from Boston to Washington will be like one continuous city. So I think that every city should have a natural center and parkways that connect each city. So, I mean, that was brilliant. I mean, we're talking about 1840s. He already envisioned that, you know, the United States would have all these cities along the East Coast and would have highways. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out the way he had planned, but more or less it did. But Essex Fell's planner, Bowditch, worked with Olmsted. They did many projects together. Caldwell and Essex Fells have Grover Cleveland Park that's designed by the Olmsted firm. So the whole concept that Bowditch basically used to realize this amazing achievement of Essex Fells, he did it with the philosophies of Olmsted and the beautiful city movement. And that was to preserve nature while you're designing and building. So Essex Fells, in my opinion, is one of the finest examples of a suburban community using this. Well, I mean, it's true. It's magnificent, and thanks to this planning. It wasn't just because of the nature. It was because we had the best visionary planners and thinkers, you know, put their mark on Essex Fells. So this you really don't see, but this was when Olmsted was presenting the plan for Central Park, the project. He said, you know, and you can't really see all the lines, but the lines of Central Park and all the roadways are just like these contours, and he put this painting there. So he said, I want to take a landscape painting and put it in the middle of the city, and that's how we're going to preserve America's natural landscape in every city. So this is our Grover Cleveland Park, and the characteristic waterways. And the next few images are more or less indicative of, you know, the beauty of the landscape. I always think of Essex Fells, I envision these tall, sinuous trees, you know, tall growth trees, and these, you know, gentle rolling hills, and then the dogwoods sort of as an undergrowth with the blossoms. It's just so beautiful. This is the pond in Grover Cleveland Park with the original bridge called White Bridge. And that's what it looked like at the other side. Now, Grover Cleveland Park had mills. It had a windmill right on the brook, as we see here in this map. In my opinion, this is a this is in the school, and it sort of immortalizes the fact that the park had a windmill. It was right in front of the Knollwood Mansion. I believe that this is by either Reginald Marsh, who was a summer resident in Essex Fells.
And that's in the grammar school, correct?
Yes. It could be by his dad, who did subway tiles for New York City that are very similar to this. So that has to be documented, but to me it's odd. Thank you. So. It's really the community in Essex Fells. I mean, the planning was brilliant, and the original residents, really appreciated their beautiful environment. And this tradition continues in all of the organizations, like, the Garden Club and the School Foundation. These are some very old images from the late 1800s. My house is on this brook, and it looks exactly like that today. This is Runnymede Road. Basically, you don't see that services building and the post office. This is before they were built. It's very unusual. I discovered that the brook behind my house in the area is called the Glens, not the Glen. The Glen is behind the school, and the Glens, plural, is the stream that runs out of Grover Cleveland Park at the edge of the Trotter's Tracks. Oh, I love this. Every year, all of the brush of the pond is burned before they let the water back in. But in the last few years, the flowers haven't really been very dense, but it's a magnificent spectacle to see this whole field of yellow flowers, and then it becomes the pond that you see on the right. This is the book, the Centennial book that Ron and Sharon Ellis put together, and having done that, they preserved the archives so meticulously. So now we're going to look at the progression of houses, because I love houses. I'm an architect, and I became an architect because I basically love houses. I'm like a house freak. So here we go with 1893, when the New York Suburban Land Company and Mr. Fell and Mr. Drexel, and they all came out. And this is basically, please help me pronounce the name, Bowditch's scheme of the winding roads, because in the Olmsted school of thought, you had to revere the natural beauty of the landscape, so all of your design elements and infrastructures have to respect that. So the roads in Essex Fells, I mean, basically there's only 3 roads that all wind into each other, but the roads follow the natural contour of the landscape, and also enhanced view sheds. And this is 1913, so they were well on their way with constructing houses. Basically, you see the black dots? Those are footprints of what was built in 1913. So you see that most of the town is still undeveloped, but that was the major scheme of it. So it was all done very elegantly and nicely. Bowditch, was very illustrious, by the way. Not only did he work for Olmsted and do several projects with him, but he also designed the grounds at the Biltmore Mansion in Newport, Rhode Island. He did other planned communities, but he was a very, very fancy architect, planner. And well, his architect that did the houses that you see on the right, there were 5 original model houses, and they were designed by W.L. Price, who was the architect that worked with, this group. This is Wooten Road, and you notice how beautifully this is all done? I mean, I do that at my house. It takes forever. So you can imagine how many people worked to build the infrastructure, and the stone swale, gutters. I mean, they're fabulous. Also, everything is natural stone. So we're looking at some of the original houses. Some were, and they were all really built as vacation houses for people that lived in Philadelphia. That was the idea. There was a train. Of course there was a train, because J.P. Morgan was Mr. Drexel's partner, and also came out to build a house in Caldwell. And I would say that it's a very hybrid design. I just couldn't really explain it. It's so hybrid, you can't really call it shingle style, or it's more like the arts and crafts movement, like Sir Edwin Lutyens in England was doing. These very romantic, it's all about the landscape and, all of these very romantic gables on this low building in a hilly situation. But, I mean, this kind of craftsmanship is irreplaceable. The houses are very valuable. This is the largest state house that used to face in front of the train station. And you'll see it in other pictures of the Kingsley School. The Kingsley School that was on the other side was just such an elegant school, and I never really understood that until Dick Gibbs showed me his photographs that you'll see. It was just so elegant. It was like a British boarding school, but for the aristocracy. This is the house on Rensselaer that you don't really see this part of it, because you only see the back, but it was also a school at one point. Now it's a house. You probably recognize it from here. But just look at all the details are amazing. I mean, look at the stones from the brook, the boulders that are used. And this is just so original. They were building carpenter Gothic cottages everywhere until now, this point. Now this is a very important house, the Convict House, and the convicts have did they come with Robert Tree, or did they come later?
No, they came around the same time. They're a New Jersey founder family.
Yeah. So this is the Convict House on Breslin Avenue, and you'll see amazing images of what the flower gardens were like. I'll show you. This is one of the pillar houses. So, I mean, you notice the details, and it makes sense because Essex Fells was considered a fine resort. There was a train that took you to Philadelphia, and you could come out here and play golf. There was, it was all sort of focused around the idea of recreation. Now this is a house it was an original farmhouse. This is Mayor Abbott's house. It was Miss May's. Here it's called the Lodge, but I think the Lodge Lodge was the second country club that I'll show you. So I don't really know, but this is the Abbott's house today. And this is what their neighborhood looked like before it was developed. So you have this amazing ornamental barn that I think is most obviously by the developers of Essex Fells. And then that's the Miss May's complex. It's just beautiful. I mean, look at that's the Passaic River Valley. So you have to imagine that from Essex Fells to where that other hill is, there was a mile-high glacier pressing all of the terrain down. And so at its edges, you have these hills that formed, and Essex Fells is one of them. I love this house. There's two exact identical houses like this in Essex Fells. It reminds me a lot of Grey Gardens in East Hampton. If any of you have ever seen it, it's almost the same house. It has the same floor plan. This is much prettier, but Grey Gardens has the same Americana Revival details. The only thing that they did on this one, which is I find very, very daring in a design, is to put this like romantic sweep going down to the ground, because they didn't really want any fancy looking houses at that point. They just wanted everything to look very natural. When another student of Olmsted was the planner for Montclair. His name is John Nolan. He went to Harvard and was taught by Olmsted's sons. Olmsted was blind. He really didn't see any of his things being realized. His sons worked for him, and he adopted all of his nieces and nephews, and they worked for him too. But he unfortunately had the problem of his losing his eyesight. And he organized himself and did the most brilliant planning that America has ever seen. So, you know, it's remarkable. And he had this whole system that he created so that allowed him to work without any disability and to, you know, just keep going. This is an amazing house, one of the pillar houses. It's on Oval Road. I wish I had a better photograph of this house. I did, but I can't find it on the 9,000,000,000 photographs that I have. This is called Westover, and it's the house of a former mayor and a civic leader, and Bolton. I'm sorry, I'm not looking. Holton, I'm sorry, Mr. Holton, thank you.
Robert.
Right, I should take notes and read from notes, but I can't do that. So, if I do say, now this is Buttonwood Road, and these were deliberately built as vacation houses for Grover Cleveland Park. These are in the shingle style, or in the sort of style that they were using in Essex Fells. That's only particular to Essex Fells as far as I'm concerned. And there were other houses on Grover Cleveland Park that Olmsted copied, the Olmsted brothers copied from the Forest House on Runnymede Road. They just took the Forest House, copied it, and then put about 3 or 4 of them going up Brookside. And this is a house that was on Roseland Avenue that was before the, and I see that that was probably the original part of the house, and then it was modified in the 1800s. This is the Rierson House. I believe it came originally from Bergen County. It's a Dutch farmhouse that was moved. And I was surprised to learn that it was originally from Bergen County, because in Bergen County, when there's a house like this, they usually move it. And so it was interesting to know that it wound up. Now, They were going to build a train line that would go from, let's say you could go from Montclair, well, you could go from Hoboken to Morristown. That was the first idea, but it had to cut through First Mountain at Cranes Gap. That's sort of like Bloomfield Avenue and Upper Mountain Avenue. So they tried to do that. And that would have meant that Caldwell could have had train service. And it was an idea from, sort of the 1860s. So they began to do the work. And this was before J.P. Morgan and, all that. And the Small family, who actually owned the trolley line, this was sort of before that. But this is a train tunnel that begins on Upper Mountain Avenue and goes under Cranes Gap, sort of like, this is Bloomfield Avenue here. So they couldn't do it because when they started digging the tunnel, they hit a vein, and that really became what is today 50% of Tony's Brook in Montclair. They hit a vein of water and just flooded out the whole thing and created a neighborhood called Frog Hollow because it became a wetland. And the neighborhood still exists today. This is J.P. Morgan's house in Caldwell. It's on Hillside Avenue. Is this something that people know?
I thought that was his cousin Roland's house.
On the register,
Yeah.
I'll show you. This is in the New Jersey Archives of Historic Preservation.
Is that the 1986 survey?
It says George Moore.
Yeah, that's the 86 survey.
So that's where I get my information from the archive.
Yeah, I don't know that that's that market.
Yeah. I always heard that it was his cousin. It was a relative of his and not him.
So the name's George or G, because there's so many different, in history, when you want to document something and it really has no documents, you then have to rely on something called the Wellman scale, and that's like narratives. So half of the people that I speak to say that was J.P. Morgan's house, and then there's the other half that say, well, it could have been his wife's house, or it could have been, you're saying a cousin.
Cousin.
But let's not forget that, all right, if it was or was not J.P. Morgan's house, they were connected with Drexel and the whole bringing the trains in.
And that's how son Morgan got to Caldwell.
Yes. Or that's how the train line somehow got to Essex Fells.
And that half timbering was put in the 50s, 1950s.
Here you see the train. This is Bloomfield Avenue at the bend, and St. Aloysius Church would be here. Right. Originally was across the street. That pond is the turnaround in front of the Caldwell Community Center. And you see Westville Avenue. And then Morgan's house would be, here it says Gertrude Morgan.
Oh, okay. Well, it's still a J. It's still a J.
I think I have to have a talk with Beverly Kirkosy after this, and
And
we're
then
gonna have to figure out.
there's another piece of property behind
Mhm.
on Forest that says Gertrude.
But you really have to look at, you can look at the city directories and you'll see who was living at that address. And these houses, they changed hands a lot. So, we'll figure it out.
And it's also difficult to document because when it's a summer house, it's not that easy to find, because there's usually, they're either the proprietor or they rent it. But here on Hillside Avenue in Caldwell, there's a lot of big lodge houses that are built. You even can see that houses have been built in front of them, newer houses. But that was in, well, you can tell from here. In Arlington, this is the big estate. This is the Bastianelli house that was a huge lodge with a winery. And his son was married to Small, and the Smalls owned that hotel, the Grover House, and that whole property there. Emily Corbiere was the Smalls' daughter. And the small house is still there, actually. Right there. It's like a white,
Number 30.
yeah, number 30, yes.
And I'm guessing Emily Corbiere had a large orchard, and that's why Orchard Square is so named.
It could be, because they were all out here. You know, people that had properties out here did personal farming for themselves. And I think that there might have been a lot of orchards because there is a winery structure on this property, the Bastinelli property. And originally I was thinking wine, but now I believe that there was a lot of apple cider being made.
Well, the Baldwins in North Caldwell had extensive apple orchards. And the Cranes in West Caldwell also had extensive apple.
Yeah, and even the Cranes used to, like the Montclair apple cider industry, they used to call it New Jersey Lightning. And that was the only thing that they could really sell. You could either sell your New Jersey Lightning or your land. There was a certain point where the farming wasn't doing too well. Yes?
Also, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the Connor car dealership family lived in the Bastinelli house. I remember when I was a kid in the 70s, I would go past that house and they would always have a Renault parked there, and they would always have dealer plates. I think that's where they lived because they owned the biggest and possibly only Renault dealership in New Jersey back in the 70s.
That's amazing. I'm so glad you told me. I'm going to go there tomorrow.
I assume that that's where Connors lived.
Well, the Connors family also they were living in just in the Pinebrook area. And there's actually a history of that family that talks about them and their Dutch relatives, even though they were Jewish, and that whole area from Pinebrook into West Caldwell. So you're right on track with that.
Wow, that is a great find. Thank you. So, Dick Gibbs had these beautiful, beautiful images. So here's the Essex Fell Station. As you see, it's in that sort of architectural vocabulary of, the river rocks, and then the borders in the same material. And this is a characteristic of Essex Fells. And believe me, because I've been doing it for myself, taking rocks out of the brook and trying to make borders on my property, it's like so much work. These are fun to see. These are some tickets. Are they tickets?
Yeah.
Yeah. Timetable. So you see New York, Chamber Street, Jersey City. You would take the ferry across Caldwell, Essex Fells. And sometimes when I read about commuting back then, it basically took just as much time as it does today to get to it really does. It's like really unbelievable. Maybe it takes even longer today because there was no such thing as traffic then. You just had a horse that maybe got tired, but now you can be in 3 hours of traffic in Manhattan. This is so lovely. I love this with the ivy. People are always trying to get me to take the ivy off my house. I just can't. Isn't that going to make... Now, the Kingsley School was so fancy, and you'll see it soon. And you'll see the roster of, there's a lot of students, or there's several students from South America that have very fancy European names. So that was a way for them to get to school or the train. Now, Pam, that's your house. And then the original station is still there. What is that called? It's not Oak Lane at that point. Is it still Oak Lane? The original?
Now it's Chestnut, but.
Oh, Chestnut. Yeah. Okay. Now I just love these. I think
that's actually the second train station.
Yeah.
Across the tracks, the original one is now around the corner. They moved that. It's a private home. This was right along by the green, shown pretty well on the map. And that was the second station.
So, let's say what we said before was Pam's house is over there, right?
Right.
Like your house is that way. This is the Pam house. This was the candy store for the students of Kingsley and for the residents, and you could buy the paper. It says Essex Fells, and I can't really, oh, Essex Fells Properties, so that was like a real estate office as well. Now, also with the train, you could come to Caldwell and go to the Monongahela Inn, and it was an absolutely, you know, 5-star, wonderful hotel built to overlook the Passaic River Valley and the sunsets, like Miss Mays that I showed you before. There was a golf course, and you know, these were very fine resorts. Hotel Montclair, that's now the site of the Rockcliffe Apartments, was another 5-star hotel that was very busy and frequented by New York City, you know, wealthy New York City people and actresses and politicians. And, oh, and I love the menu, because the menu back then, it said the typical local menu was grilled steak and grilled mushrooms. So that's what they would give. And then the sandwiches were the Sloppy Joe, which is, you know, cold cuts with coleslaw, not the Sloppy Joe that, you know, with the whatever ground meat, but it would be like cold cuts, cheese, and coleslaw. That's why they called it the Sloppy Joe. So the Kingsley School, so it's saying it's 22 miles from New York, and at that time in history, when they started to build, like they started doing a lot of development and building, people were becoming very, very sick with typhoid and cholera from the drinking water. So there was this big scare then. Llewellyn Haskell, who founded Llewellyn Park, lived in a castle that Alexander Jackson Davis designed for him on Ridge Road in North Arlington. And the water for the water towers came from the river, and his wife and 3 of his children died. So he was basically ruined from this tragedy in his life, and he was the world's wealthiest chemicals merchant. And his architect, H.A. Davis, said, coming out to Montclair, my relatives have these beautiful countrysides, and he loved it, and he bought the land that is now Llewellyn Park. It was twice the size when he bought it. The south end of Montclair was originally Llewellyn Park. What I was saying is that plumbing was a problem. People were like, you know, they're talking about health and beauty. That was the big thing. You know, that was the movement, the City Beautiful movement, America the Beautiful. You know, that was something, while all these immigrants were coming in and all this development was going on, and cities were getting more and more hectic and you know, sort of decaying already, there was all this idea that, no, we're in America, it's so beautiful, the nature, the health. So the Kingsley School was built, you know, on this site. Today it's Egan's Field, if you didn't know that. And before, after the Kingsley School, it was the Bible College. And I always sort of saw material about the Bible College, and I didn't think it was like very fancy or elegant or anything, but you can see with all of these pictures how nice everything was. These are just some views. But this is the Glee Club.
Was it a boarding school or a day school or
Both. Both. You'll see they had like a limousine, and on the roster there's students that live in Montclair, in the Oranges, in Newark, and also South America, also New York City. see, you have Chatham, Caldwell, New York City, Livingston, Montclair, New York City, Ardsley on the Hudson, El Salvador. Oh, no. Where was the one? Oh. I'm sorry, I had another page of the roster board. No, there's another page that showed all the stuff on it. This is the curriculum for all of the years. And they had phonic exercises and drills. I mean, it's very interesting to see what they were studying. They were being prepared. You know, it was very strong on college preparatory learning and composition and memorizing. The swim team. It's funny because the guys in this photograph, some of them look like they could be from today. Usually old photographs have like an oh, that big house is the house that I showed you before, and then the candy store would be to the right of it.
There's the train station, Frank, to the left, too.
Yes, and the train station. Montclair Academy was also a military academy at that time, so I think that they were, you know, sort of prepping for World War I with that in mind, that there could be a big world war, so that was part of the education. These are some cadets with their, you know, house teacher. Football. The dining room. I think it's amazing they have this chinoiserie wallpaper. Very, very fancy for its day. And you see all of the rubble stone, local rubble stone incorporated. They're always so well dressed when you look at the photo. This was the car that could take you to Montclair or Newark, you know, the students who were day students. And then they renovated it to become, I'm sorry, the Kingsley School, the Bible College. And this is what the site looks like today. This house was the original train station. And, wait a minute. No, wait, now I'm,
Yes.
oh yeah, there's, okay. That's, here are the water towers, that's the Trotter's Woods, and that's Eatonfield. No, I was hoping to see Pam's house, but I guess that's Maple Lane, right? These are the houses on Maple Lane? Yeah. Okay. This is the back of that house on Rensselaer, but here it says it's Miss Parsons' school at 93 Rensselaer. So I guess it had served as a school. I'd like to know how many years. This is the Essex Fells School, and it's designed by Morse. Morse is an architect that did several beautiful English-style country mansions in Essex Fells. And he always incorporated the ironwork of James Marsh, who owned the foundry in Essex Fells. This is the new building at the school, and it's designed by Timpson. And Timpson was a very important architect from town. He just did so much, but also he was the he redesigned the General Gould's house. So he also did the Food Town building in Montclair. That's now the Whole Foods on Bloomfield Avenue. He did the public service building on Bloomfield Avenue, Montclair. He was just a very big local architect and a grand gentleman because he's done so much volunteer work and civic work in town. This is the school. Now, you know, going back to the Olmsted concept, you build a school on the edge of a forest. You know, they wouldn't really think of that in Europe because it would be scary. But you do it with this new kind of movement and this new philosophy in America. It's because the children can actually learn from nature and enhance the beauty of their day by you know, being in contact with it. This is the 8th grade of the Essex Fells School. Now, this is a very important icon and image of the Essex Fells School. Their motto is "Studies pass into character." And a friend of mine, Tommy Shearer, who actually went to the school, and I were doing a project together for an architecture course at Cooper Union. He was a student as well. And he said, "Oh, I'm going to come up with the portal." We had to like create a portal for a model. And he made that out of plaster. He said, "I'm going to try to remember what the portal looked like in Essex Fells," and that was his sort of interpretation of it. But see, it sort of sticks in your mind. It was a very, very gracious learning environment, and still is, I'm sure, the Essex Fells School. Hail Essex Fells, best school of its kind, will go through life keeping you in mind, and certainly this is probably, oh, I forget the name of that street, but it's at the end of Wooten Road. Yeah, something like that. And that's where the Liberty Staples were. Basically, in that time, a lot of people wouldn't drive anywhere. They would take a train or something like that. You know, they would get there and then rely on the local livery stable. They'd, you know, get a horse or a car, or they'd have a driver. They'd engage a driver. So you really didn't need to keep a stable in your country house in like the new forming suburbs. You would just rely on services. You could have domestics. You know, usually a large house, a large local house from back then would require 10 domestics to work. And rather than traveling around with your staff, you would just employ people that lived locally. Maybe you would take with you an employee. And there's a lot of houses around here built around 1900 that have a bedroom with a sink in the attic. And that's because those houses were basically rental houses or weekend houses. And you really didn't need, you know, a lot to run the house. You know, you didn't need a car because you could rent one, or rent a drive, you know, or have a driver. And other people could work for you in the house. This is the water company. It was right on the train tracks. There's Mr. Holton going over plans of, you know, further developing the infrastructure. Here's the water towers that, fortunately, I don't see from my house because they're covered by all the trees. But Essex Fells is basically a water company, and it has a huge rateable of old water that's sold to other reservoirs, other cities. So it also is a driving factor in keeping taxis down. Here we have the Pump House and Wooten Road. Or Buttonwood, I'm sorry, that's Buttonwood. That's the Forge building at the top. It's still there today. It's where James Marsh operated. James Marsh is the person who designed the Essex Fells logo with the little house and the tree. Mm-hmm. And that's his work. And that's very, it's very amazing that we have that logo in Essex Fells, and it's designed by somebody who comes from such a prestigious family of artists. here you see the train station building and Victory Gardens. Mr. Holton was very organizing the people. Here it says C.W. Holton, Essex Fells. And I think that during the war, there was a lot of volunteering going on. This is when they were building the municipal building. And to me, it looks like the early 50s. The police were founded in 1902. I love these photographs because the cars are so cool. This is an amazing photograph. I think a film should be made from this photograph. This is along Fells Road. But you have a sense of how undeveloped everything is.
Yeah, I have to take a picture of this for my son.
Okay. I wonder if they ever got to use the guns. Yeah, probably not. But the police in Essex Fells are amazing. If you would dial 911 by accident, you have 3 police cars within 5 minutes. They're amazing. I just love this. This is so stylish. This is the back of the municipal building where the fire department is. And I love how you have sort of like this moat where the fire trucks went into. Is that the other side? Or is that an addition? That's the other side. Yeah. Or maybe that, oh no, that was the other side. There was a tower. Now, John Nolan, when he did the master plan for Montclair, he made a recommendation that all of the architecture should be like English countryside rural architecture to match the landscape. So that idea you see a lot in Essex Fells because they were trying to make it sort of look like an English hamlet. In fact, Runnymede Road, where the services building is and the municipal building, is named after where they signed the Magna Carta in England. This says American Ambulance, Great Britain. It's a gift of the community to Essex Fells. At the time of World War I, it was it was considered very tasteless to be part of the Gilded Age galas and fancy dressing. And so, for example, Mrs. Kipp, who designed Kipp's Castle for herself and her husband, deliberately designed it with very small rooms inside so that she had the excuse, possibly, so that she didn't have to entertain, or you didn't have that sort of thing where people wanted to visit you, because it was a philosophy to only focus on your immediate family and what social work that you could do for the community, but not social life. This is I think he just looks so fun with this hat, but firemen to me are modern day nobility. And the Essex Fells Fire Department is also remarkable. It's a volunteer fire department. This is the post office building, and I didn't know that until the 70s, you had to go to the post office building to get your mail. They didn't come to your house. So that gives you an idea of how close-knit the community was. This is St. Peter's. And then behind you see the Sullivan Mansion. I think it's Sullivan Mansion. And that's where Babe Ruth used to always come to visit the son who was not ill. That's the new building, built in the 50s. This is the other church. This was the first country club. It's now a private house on, I believe, Hathaway. This was the second country club. It was also called the Lodge. It's published in the Essex Fells History book, but the photo's backwards. So it's a very beautiful house on the corner of Oval Road and Old Chester. Though this is what the house looks like today. And it was called the Lodge. So here it says playground at the Lodge. So I don't know if that was in that property or at Miss May's, where the Mayor Abbott and Jill lived. This is the Essex Fells Country Club up there. See it? And that's the present day Country Club complex. Here there's that big estate. I think the name is Thompson. And it's called the Pleasantdale Chateau. It's a beautiful, beautiful country estate. Eagle Rock Avenue had a lot of country estates, like Mayfair Farms was the Holmes family's riding, it's where they would go to ride, because the shopping mall next to it was where their riding rinks were. And then if you know the Essex County, the West Essex Stable is sort of behind that area. So, and even the restaurant, the Manor, was another country house for horses. And then the Holmes family who owned Mayfair Farm, you know, that original house, had a hunting lodge, and that's those, like two stone houses on Eagle Rock Avenue on the other side of Essex Fells in Roseland, and they have stone walls in front of them.
Yeah.
That whole area was their hunting lodge. So they were pretty sportive. Their original house was in Llewellyn Park. It was the Merck House. And then that's where they all went back to live later in life when they sold all of their resort properties. This is the pond. It's an amazing, amazing establishment. And it's just so, it's so remarkable for a community to have so many, you know, just really fabulous amenities. I put this in especially because Sharon Ellis is sitting at the top, and she's basically responsible for painstakingly preserving all of these images, well, not all of them, but the Essex Fells archive. And then there's the Gibbs archive that is now archives as well. Bonnie Babson and Gene Eastman did a project back in the 80s or early 90s. They identified these properties for a history project for the Garden Club. So I wanted to present to you most of these, but I have 2 or 3. But this was a really great project because as a historian, it really, having done this project, they set up for me the entire sort of like house archive, because I can go back to see when, I could go back to see what the most important properties were at that point in history, and Gene Eastman and Bonnie Babson did that. So that's really valuable. This is a beautiful house. It's one of my favorite houses in town. It's 44 Rensselaer. It's the Ellis's house. And it's on the list of the historic house. It's one of Essex Fells' original estates. The property is magnificent, and so are all of the plantings in the back. Because basically, in the front, you have the street, but in the back, you just have this, you know, this garden that just never seems to end. You don't see any houses. You feel like you're in the, you know, complete unadulterated countryside. And that was the idea of Essex Fells planning. This is the Holton's house, Mayor Holton and Mrs. Holton. in their library, and they were very, very, very instrumental on getting the community involved with gardening and the garden club. And I love these. These are from glass slides. This is the Convict House that we saw before on Roseland Avenue. And so you can imagine that there was nothing behind them. It was just acres and acres. And of course, this was done at a time when there was really not colored photography. So they were glass plates, and they were colored by hand to sort of document the type of garden. I just love it. Look at those peonies. I mean, that's amazing. And the garden club today still is a very, very important, locomotive for all of the volunteer work and reaching out to other charitable institutions, organizing fundraisers and making donations. Extremely admirable. Mrs. Holton was the president of the garden club, I'm sure, several times. Here in 1989, they're inviting you. I get one of these every year around the holidays to invite the community to the lighting of the tree and singing of the carols. And Mayor Abbott reads from Dr. Seuss, all the Who's in Whoville. And then there's all the luminaires. And the entire town gets just, lined with candles for the holiday, which is so beautiful. The Festival of Lights. This was the Art in Bloom that the Garden Club did a couple of years back. It was last year in 2016. And I'm including it because I did some research on the local art and artists. So I don't know if any of you have actually seen this. It's a gift from the Holton family, and it's hanging over a fireplace in the services building. It's about as big as this screen, and it's an original Delft tile painting depicting Rembrandt's work, The Signing of the Magna Carta at Runnymede. So Runnymede Road is where this is, and they named Runnymede Road for that reason. So this is a very clever gift, and it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Delft tile panel from the Konig Kyle titular Macron factory of the Delft school. So this is the, I would say that this is a Morse design from, other buildings that are very analogous in town. But this was the forge. James Marsh did the sign that we all know and love today. He also did a lot of lighting in local houses. He did he was commissioned to do the traffic, the street name signs, which are basically only little metal because there's like a tree branch with like a piece of bark with some white lettering that you can never see, and then a piece of metal, and that was to blend in with the natural landscape. Now, James Marsh's brother was Reginald Marsh, who's a very famous American artist, and he did a lot of things, and he did a lot of pieces that represented the hustle and bustle of New York City. He did paintings that were sort of like realism for the day of what life was like in New York City. Some of it very brutal, but the Marsh family lived in Nutley, and like the Bouffier family, you know, Mrs. Onassis' family lived there too. And so they summered in Essex Fells, and Caroline Medina, whose family is the Bartholomew family, they were all sort of painters, were very, you know, good friends of the Marshes. It was like, you know, we had our artist community. The Gould family had a pottery studio going, and they made pottery with local artists. I mean, it was an amazing time. And Reginald Marsh did this map of Essex Fells. He'd also done the map of Montclair. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but this is a much better piece. And you have, you know, it's sort of like an overview of the suburbs, so he could tell, I guess, his friends from New York where he was, or where he was from. So you have Manhattan, and you have Essex Fells, you know, after you go up this big mountain. This is the Myelica tile panel that's in the school, and my opinion is that it is, you know, that's the windmill from Grover Cleveland Park with the brook, and it was possibly done by a Marsh, either Reginald or his father, who did the subway tiles. And James Marsh, who had the foundry, did these remarkable pieces for a lot of the houses that Morse did in town. And also I think I've seen some in houses by Timpson. So, you know, you have all these themes. You know, Essex Fells houses were mainly built as vacation houses at that time. So, you know, it makes sense that they have sporting things. And that's his sign that he made, the metal silhouette. James Timpson, who was the architect that did a lot, that's the Whole Foods building in Montclair. I don't know if you recognize it. And then that's another building he did. That's the PSC&G building. And he painted such a beautiful series of local landscapes. A lot like Hassler did. It was the thing to do. The Duffy family from Essex Fells has a lot of their family members who paint. It was just like a natural thing to do. So Henry Morse, as I was saying, designed these beautiful houses in our area, sort of like this vernacular English countryside mansion type of architecture with fabulous details. See how he captures the thatching. When you see a roof like that in the suburbs, was because the architect was trying to capture the lines of a thatched roof. And Dudley Van Antwerp loved doing that. It's done in stone. These are the artists that were in Art in Bloom. Bud Endress is a local photographer, but he has 3 pieces in the MoMA that he did in their permanent collection. So, you know, we do have quite a substantial, thriving artist community. Margaret Benito does beautiful pottery. Other people I paint. You know, we all keep that going. You know, Pam, your mother even did painting, so it's something that you just do when you're in this beautiful, naturalistic masterpiece environment. This is Frank Alia, who made this amazing horse, but he's responsible for a lot of the signage. He did another, you know, he repeats James Marsh's work, and everyone in the town seems to be grateful that he's able to do it. He did the weather vane on the clubhouse in Evans Field. I was telling you about the Duffys before. They all seem to paint. And I love this painting that Mimi did. It just, to me, it can only be Essex Fells, the hills and the roads with the stones. This is Angela Duffy, who fortunately did this watercolor of a Timpson house that was shamefully demolished. I mean, how could you demolish such a beautiful, magnificent American house? There's so much detail in Essex Fells. A lot of it is covered with ivy, that's true, but if you really stop and look, this is another house that I love. It's just so simple. I think it's a Morris house from the website, but it too sort of like, in a very orthogonal way, it copies sort of like what a thatched roof would look like. It's sort of mannerist. So these are just typical, beautiful houses. Now, when these houses were built, it was less of just a resort that you would come out to for a period and then go back to Philadelphia or New York City. So these are built, because there was transportation going to New York City, but basically you could even have your driver take you to East Orange to take the train at that point. And I deliberately said driver. Because Essex Fells is now it's the 7th wealthiest community per capita in the United States. And it's always been way up there. In fact, I don't even think they like to categorize it because Essex Fells is very low key. It's a gorgeous house. This has the same floor plan, by the way, as the house that I call the Grey Gardens house, the DeVellis house. Both son and father both have houses that are identical. But this house has the same floor plan. These houses could be Timpson, but I'm going to show you something a little later on. These are houses from, I would say, anywhere from the late 50s up. This is an older house. You can see how well it's crafted. This is a house that I love, and it has a secret garden, and the homeowner wrote a book called The Damp Garden, I think, or something like that, and I'm trying to find more material on it, but I just love it. It's so beautiful. And you notice, I mean, the house is basically on the street, and the back faces the sunset. So it sort of shows how Essex Fells is deliberately very low key, natural, and unpretentious, unlike other communities where you just see, mansion after mansion. And here it was all about the nature. Here's a mansion, I shouldn't have said that. I think this house has been demolished. Does anyone remember? I don't think it's here anymore. This one I don't see anymore either.
It's Wendy's house.
It's there? It's still there? Does it still look like?
Across from the Ellis's.
Oh, okay. Really?
It's darker.
Oh, so it's painted differently.
Ivy.
Okay.
Ivy.
Ivy, it's the ivy. I just love this house. It's just so gracious, and it's composed so well, and it's just so romantic in its details. It's so pretty. Now this is near to where I live, on Runnymede Road, sort of going out of town. Across the street from this house and my house is West Caldwell. But all of these houses on this side of Essex Fells were basically built in function to the Grover Cleveland Park. My house was built as a vacation house for a family from East Orange. And they used to drive out to the boondocks, Essex Fells, and spend, their summer holiday. But I remember when I was a child, we would just transfer to Spring Lake, and my mother could do that because she didn't work in the summer, she was in education. But my father would go to work and he wouldn't be around, and then he would just come down, for a few days when he could, and then go back. But it's only an hour's worth of distance. So back then, actually there was a family that were related. They were from, and friends from a synagogue in Newark, and they got together and they built some houses in Essex Fells as vacation houses. My house is one of those. This is a beautiful house in like a French style, sort of French Norman. Has beautiful details. It was renovated on the inside with an English Regency chinoiserie entryway with balconies and staircases that are amazing. This is the Weber house. This is a house by Morse that had fabulous light switches and those lights that I showed you before with the wall sconces. Beautiful house. This is my house, and as you can tell, it was built as a vacation house because the architect worked for the architect Edward Bowser Jr. worked for Le Corbusier, so he took back all of the concepts. He decided that the natural beauty of the site should be maintained. It was a mill pond on Runnymede Road with a brook that crosses in the middle of the property. So he said, I'm going to make a house where it basically floats on the property like a boat, and you don't ever have to have a garden or lawns or anything. It's all glass in the back so that you could just enjoy that 88 acres of Trotter's Woods. And it's just amazing. It's amazing. And we actually never really have been outside or used the outside too much because it's so beautiful just to sit there in every season. So another house of this enclave that I was describing before, of friends and a family from East Arm, one of them was Richard Meyer, and he designed this house for his parents. And it was 2 years after my house was built in the 50s. And this is an amazing house. I think you all know it. It's on the corner where the golf club is. Now this is where we have fun, because I've had this book all my life. It's from 1972. My father bought it for me because he was trying to encourage me about architecture because he saw that I had an interest as a child. So he bought me this book, and I used to go through it every day, about 100 times, and I did all the floor plans, and that's how I learned. I learned how to read floor plans from this book. But what's amazing to me now is that I picked it up last year, and I looked at it, and I found at least 8 houses that are built in Essex Fells. So that's a house on Oval Road. This is another house on Oval Road. Do you know the house? Mm-hmm. This is the plans. So, there was a builder, and I have to look at his name because Carpenter told me. There was a builder who lived on, Devon Road. And he built a lot of these houses in that period of time, but I think what he did was he had a pattern book, and he would just show people the designs, and then he had an architect or somebody draw them up. The house on Oval Road, the only difference is that instead of the garage facing that way, it's lateral, but it's the same exact house. This is a beautiful house. It's the same as in the drawings except for the windows, the fenestration. Instead of one window in the design, they wanted 2, but it's the same. And it even has all of sort of like Creole lattice work. This is on Arden. A lot of times you would take the you find the house design you liked, and then you'd have somebody local adapt it. That was the Frank's house. It was recently demolished. Do you know? Marion Frank's house. It was like a Pueblo architecture. And then that house is on Dead Road. But don't worry, that doesn't mean that Essex Fells' architecture is sort of slighted or diminished because a lot of the houses came out of a pattern book. Because the first pattern book in the United States was actually created by Downing, who I was talking about before, and it was, all of the designs come from H.A. Davis, who was the architect that I said designed Llewellyn Park and you know, a lot of houses on Upper Mountain Avenue are from New York. Not a lot, but about 5 or 6. So anyway, thank you very much. I'd like to know if you have any questions or if you have anything. I'm really grateful and flattered. Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned Llewellyn Park, where Edison lives.
Yes.
Glenmont?
Yes.
And that was, I think, by, was it Henry Hudson Holly?
Holly.
Did he have any influence or any design in Essex Fells? With his Queen Anne style, or?
I don't think so. He was from another school of thought.
Uh-huh.
He wasn't very naturalist. He liked very heavy, fancy, sort of
Castle-like, or?
Yeah, and he designed a few houses on Upper Mountain Avenue and a few houses in Montclair. But I think that he wasn't working anymore by the time that Llewellyn Park was being sort of developed. I think he'd been out.
Okay, thank you.
I like his story. Well, yes.
There's a little log house by the ice pond.
Mm-hmm.
When was that built or constructed?
Do you mean across the street?
I think right next to the pond, and then people can warm up if they're ice skating or there's a fire going in there.
Liz or Pam, do you know anything? Like, do you know who made it?
No, I have no idea.
Yeah.
My friend just invited me. She was ice skating, and she said
About a clubhouse. They were talking about the clubhouse.
But no, it was last winter, it was like 2 degrees outside, and my friend said, "You want to come and meet me? I'm ice skating." And I said, "No thanks." You know. So, she said she could warm up in the cabin.
Yeah, it's just like the skating.
But the skating pond, it's a skating pond.
Yeah.
So I was wondering when that was constructed, or?
Well, I skated there the first time, I think I was about 11 or 12, so it was there.
Turn of this century.
Yeah. So it's World Architecture.
Thank
We're
you.
from the arts and crafts movement or something, I don't know, but it's been there all my life.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I really